Buried deep beneath the earth, a time capsule lay dormant for decades, its contents a closely guarded secret. But now the time has come to unearth its hidden treasures, and what lies within could rewrite history as we know it. Prepare to be captivated by the astonishing revelations contained within this enigmatic time capsule, a testament to a past that someone desperately wanted to keep concealed.
A dark time capsule buried deep within the Vatican's secret archives. Lost artifacts and warnings to future generations. These are scary time capsules that won't be opened until years into the future. The Crypt of Civilization. This one is really cool because it's not just buried in the ground like you'd imagine most time capsules to be. This one is an entire room-sized time capsule. It's a massive vault designed to last for over 6,000 years. Yeah, this one isn't set to be opened until the year 8113, a little more than 30 years, but close enough. It was sealed up way back in 1940 at Oglethorpe University in Georgia. Thornwell Jacobs, the professor and historian who ran the project, was inspired by the opening of the Egyptian pyramids and wanted to create something people, or whatever species exists thousands of years into the future, could discover. A snapshot of human civilization as it was in the early 20th century. As for what's inside, it's just about everything you can imagine that would give future people a sense of what life was like. There are books, films, everyday items like a typewriter, a sewing machine, and a cash register. They even included recordings of famous speeches in radio shows, thinking people in the far future might want to know what our leaders and entertainers sounded like, which they probably would. Unfortunately, these folks had no way of knowing that the internet was going to be a thing, and all that stuff is just floating around in the cloud anyway. But I mean, who knows what'll happen in 6,000 years? Maybe things will get really bad and we'll have reverted back to like knuckle-dragging cave people scrounging for scraps in rivers of toxic waste. I mean, 8113. Think about that for a second. We're talking about a time capsule meant to outlast nearly every civilization we've ever known. The world would be completely different by then. Will there even be anyone left to open it? And if there is, what will they think of us? Ever heard of America's Stonehenge? They were this massive granite monument that popped up in rural Georgia back in 1980. They had these 10 guidelines for humanity engraved on them in 8 different languages. The creators believed, and probably still believe, that humanity will face disaster in the future, a social, nuclear, or economic calamity. The guidestones were created to be just that, guides for whatever society would grow in the aftermath. Now, no one really knew who funded or built them, only that a mysterious guy using the alias R.C. Christian commissioned the monument. In 2022, the guidestones were damaged in a bombing by a vandal and were removed. But there's a conspiracy theory that claims there's a time capsule buried beneath the guidestones. A time capsule put there when the monument was built in case it was ever destroyed. Some think it could contain historical documents or artifacts from the 80s, but because the guidestones have always been so mysterious and controversial, others believe it could be something way more sinister, like plans for a new world order or a manifesto, or maybe even something supernatural. With the guidestones gone, the chances of ever finding out what's buried there are very slim, unless whatever was there was removed along with the monument and was covered up. Samuel Adams and Paul Revere's time capsule. So back in 1795, these two Revolutionary War legends decided to stash away a time capsule in the cornerstone of the Massachusetts State House. This capsule was forgotten for over 200 years until it was accidentally rediscovered in 2014 during some routine maintenance work. And when they cracked it open, they found old coins, newspapers, and a silver plate engraved by Revere himself. And as cool as this stuff was, there's always been this lingering question. Was that all they left behind? Some historians and conspiracy buffs think there might be more to this time capsule, maybe even a second hidden lair. There's this theory that Adams and Revere, being the rebels they were, might have hidden secret documents or even some sort of coded message. The idea is that they might have wanted to pass down something more important to future generations, something that maybe we haven't found yet. So while we've technically opened this time capsule, there's this nagging feeling, or maybe admittedly a hope, that there are still some secrets out there, hidden in some other cornerstone or buried deep in the archives. The Vatican time capsule. Alright, so this one is even more mysterious than the last three. Feels like something right out of the Da Vinci Code. Now, let me say right off the bat, there's no official acknowledgement that a Vatican time capsule even exists. But if there's one place in the world where you'd expect to find a hidden trove of ancient secrets, it's the Vatican. And according to rumors and whispers from those who are into this kind of stuff, the Vatican may have buried a time capsule deep in its archives, or possibly even beneath St. Peter's Basilica. We already know the Vatican's secret archives exist, so why wouldn't there be something even more secretive buried deep inside of there? Well, what's in it? Well, some say it could contain religious artifacts that are too controversial to reveal to the public, things like ancient scrolls or even evidence of early church conspiracies. And what if it holds apocalyptic prophecies or documents that could shake the very foundations of the Catholic Church itself? The idea that the Vatican, a place that's already so surrounded by mystery and power, could be sitting on something that might never see the light of day is unsettling, to say the least. And even if it does exist, who's to say when it'll ever be opened, if ever? The rumored lost Alcatraz time capsule. So Alcatraz, the infamous prison that housed some of the most dangerous criminals in American history, including Al Capone. There's this long-standing rumor, though, that a time capsule was hidden somewhere on the island by the inmates or the prison staff before the prison was shut down in 1963. No one knows for sure if this time capsule even exists, but there are stories from former guards and inmates who claim to have heard things about it. If it does exist, the big question is, what's inside? Well, some people think it could be a collection of items from the prisoners themselves, letters, personal effects, maybe even confessions to some especially messed up crimes. Others believe the time capsule might have been placed there by the prison staff, containing records or documents that could shed some new light on what really went on behind those bars.
Next up at number 5 now we have Keo. Technically, Keo isn't a time capsule yet, but for me it's too interesting to not include on this list. Keo is a proposed space time capsule which was intended to launch back in 2003. It would be set on a course that would lead back to Earth 50,000 years in the future. It sounded like the perfect time capsule. It will be out there drifting in space without ever being tainted or ruined by people here on Earth. And what would the world look like when it finally landed again in 50,000 years? Well, fans of the project have been left wondering those questions. The project was delayed until 2006, then to 2007, then 2008, then 2010, and then basically every year since then. Currently, the Keo website cites 2009 as its launch. They're inviting every person in the world to contribute to their capsule. They're looking for people to post messages to the people living 50,000 years in the future. They promise that every message will be included without any censorship. Although Keo has been delaying its launch now for over 15 years, many people still send their messages to them just in case the project ever does go ahead. Moving on now to number 4, we have the CN Tower. Some of you may be surprised to learn that our channel is based in Toronto, Canada. Perhaps the most iconic landmark in this city is the CN Tower. Standing at over 1,800 feet, it's towered over the city since its completion in 1976. To mark the occasion, a time capsule was placed at the very top of the tower inside the walls of the lookout level. It's intended to be opened in the year 2076, a century after its completion. Inside, the contents contain a letter from former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, letters from school children at the time, copies of 3 newspapers, Canadian coins and bills, and even a video about how the tower was constructed. Isn't that nice? Next up at number 3 now we have the Crypt of Civilization. This is a sealed airtight chamber from 1940 at Oglethorpe University in Georgia. The 2,000 cubic foot room contains many artifacts from the time, including everyday items, famous books, voice recordings of people such as Franklin Roosevelt or Adolf Hitler, and even a sound recording of Popeye. Don't know why. The time capsule was thought up by Thornwell Jacobs, who felt that there was so little information available from ancient civilizations and that someone had to make sure that this never happened again. He stated that because the ancient Egyptian calendar was established 6,177 years before this vault was sealed, that is also how long the vault should be sealed for. This means the Crypt of Civilization will not be opened until the year 8113. So far only about 78 years have passed, so there's still quite a while to go yet. At the number 2 spot now we have Time Capsule Expo 1970. In 1968, 2 Japanese companies, Panasonic and the Mainichi newspapers agreed to build a joint time capsule for the Japan World Exposition in 1970. It was opened up again in the year 2000 to examine its contents. It was decided that the capsule would be checked for this every 100 years. For how long, I hear you ask? Until the year 6968, 5,000 years after it was buried. When archaeologists of the future dig it up, they will find the time capsule contains items such as false teeth, a glass eye, insects in resin, an origami book, handcuffs, and even fake money. A competition was held among local Japanese schoolchildren to write a letter to the people living 5,000 years in the future. The winning entry read, "How are you, people of 5,000 years from now? I wish I could live again in your age, but I am quite happy now. I have kind parents and also a sister with whom I quarrel with once in a while. We must do our best until the next age takes over. Goodbye from 5,000 years in the past." And finally, number 1 now, we have the Yahoo capsule. In 2006, tech company Yahoo set up a time capsule project where users could contribute to how digital life was like in the year 2006. When they cut off the submissions, they had received over 170,000 messages, with the largest amount coming from people in their 20s. The collection was then sealed and given to the Smithsonian Folkways Recordings in Washington, D.C. It was decided that the capsule will be opened in 2020 to mark the 25th birthday of Yahoo. The capsule will only have been sealed for about 14 years by that point, but as I'm sure many of you are aware, that might as well be 1,000 years when it comes to the changing landscape of the internet. Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Star Wars capsule. Even some of the biggest Star Wars fans in the world might not know that there is a secret Star Wars time capsule somewhere out there. It's buried at Skywalker Ranch in California. It was put there by Star Wars creator George Lucas. He put it in the corner of the building and filled it with secret artifacts from the Star Wars movies. George was once asked when would this time capsule be opened, and he said never. Literally never. Well, not quite never, but he wants it to be discovered in the distant future by archaeologists. This is bad news for die-hard Star Wars fans out there who were really hoping to one day see the priceless contents of this time capsule. Moving on now to number 9, we have the Millennium Time Capsule. Now, as you guys might guess from the name, this time capsule was buried at the turn of the millennium in the year 2000. It was sealed by the White House and contains a number of culturally significant items from history. These include a CD, photos of Earth from space, a computer chip, a World War II helmet, a cell phone, a piece of the Berlin Wall, and even a photo of Rosa Parks. There's also a pair of Ray Charles sunglasses, because, you know, why not? For me though, the most interesting thing they put in there might actually be Twinkies. Yeah, an actual pack of Twinkies. However, I also read that the Twinkies were later removed because they were attracting mice. I guess people in 1,000 years will know a lot about our world, but almost nothing about Twinkies. What a shame. Next up at number 8 now, we have the largest time capsule. The town of Seward, Nebraska claims to have the world's largest time capsule. It was constructed by local store owner Harold Keith Davison, who wanted his grandchildren to know what his life was like when he buried it in 1975. The 45-ton vault was buried under a mound of dirt on the front lawn of his appliance store. It's packed with artifacts from his own life and also general items from the 1970s. The most striking item has to be his Chevy Vega car, which still sits inside the vault to this day. Moving on now to number 7, we have the Westinghouse time capsules. These are a pair of time capsules prepared by the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company. The first one was buried for the 1939 New York World Fair and contained fabrics, metals, plastics, literature, art, and news events from the time recorded on microfilm. The capsules are intended to be open in the year 6939, a full 5,000 years after they were buried. In that distant future, our language and culture may be so different that whoever finds the capsule may not know what to do with any of the items inside. This is why the creators of the time capsule included detailed instructions on how to make a microfilm viewer and also a projector for the newsreels. I'm sure the future humans will really appreciate that. Next up at number 6 now, we have the Helium Centennial Time Columns Monument. This was constructed in 1968 to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the discovery of helium. The time capsule is actually made up of 4 different parts. The different parts are supposed to be opened after 25 years and 50, then 100, and then 1,000 years. The first 2 have already been opened, but the third will not be open until the year 2068, and the final one until the year 3068. Now that last capsule Capsule contains a passbook for a $10 savings account from an Oklahoma City bank which draws 4% interest every year. After 1,000 years, it will be worth over $1 quadrillion. So definitely worth the wait.
Most of us have heard of the Winchester Mystery House, right? Especially if you frequent this channel. But if you're not familiar with it, it's this very bizarre mansion in San Jose, California, built by Sarah Winchester, the widow of the guy who invented the famous Winchester rifle. The house is this maze of twisting hallways, staircases that lead to nowhere, and doors that just open up into walls. It's said that Sarah kept building the house to confuse the ghosts of those killed by her husband's rifles. Now, it's already a very unsettling place, given the context, built by a woman who was clearly losing her mind. So the idea of there being a time capsule hidden somewhere in this already incredibly eerie house is definitely intriguing. According to some rumors, Sarah Winchester herself hid a time capsule within the mansion's walls before she passed away in 1922. The theory goes that she filled it with personal items, maybe even messages meant to act as warnings for future generations. But just like the house itself, this time capsule is a complete mystery. Where is it? Does it even exist? Sarah was known for her obsession with spiritualism though, so the idea of her hiding some kind of treasure or strange artifacts is definitely possible. There's also speculation that she might have left behind blueprints or instructions to the house's construction that would finally explain the madness behind its design. Back in 1909, the Arizona Gazette ran an article by this guy named G.E. Kincaid, who claimed he was rafting down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon when he came across a cave entrance about 2,000 feet up the canyon wall. He hiked up to check it out, of course, and according to Kincaid, this cave was just full of ancient artifacts. Egyptian artifacts, to be specific. Statues, tools, there were hieroglyphics, even mummies, all in this cave hidden in the middle of the Grand Canyon. He went on to say that he grabbed a few relics and sent them off to Washington, D.C. for further study. Now, if this sounds like something out of an Indiana Jones movie to you, you are not alone, especially because there's no official record of Kincaid's findings. The Smithsonian, which Kincaid claimed to have sent the artifacts to, has no documentation of ever receiving them, but this has led to a whole bunch of conspiracy theories. I mean, what the hell was this article? Some folks believe the Smithsonian is involved in a massive cover-up, hiding the evidence of some sort of Egyptian-like civilization right in North America. Some even think that the government sealed off the cave and that heavily armed guards protect it to this day, as if the cave is one big time capsule of a lost ancient civilization. The Crypt of Civilization 2. Yes, we have a sequel on our hands. Now, this one's kind of an idea that I had. A second, more modern version of the Crypt of Civilization. The idea is to build another time capsule, even bigger and more advanced than the last, and unlike the first crypt, which was pretty public and well documented, this one would be kept more secret, meant to act as more of a warning than a fascinating snapshot of current life for future civilizations. This one would contain more controversial items, things like classified documents, technologies that are ahead of their time, and warnings about the dangers our technology led to, only to be found by some future civilization long after we're gone. Now, as far-fetched as it may sound, it does make sense. I mean, hopefully we're not headed for an apocalypse, but if we were, if things were bad enough that there was no going back, why wouldn't we want to warn whatever civilization hopefully grows from the aftermath about the mistakes that we made? The Lincoln Cathedral time capsule. Now, this one's been shared on some message boards, but it's very hard to find any actual news stories about it. So either people are just messing around telling spooky stories online, or something's being kept hidden under wraps. But supposedly in 2018, during some routine restoration work at the Lincoln Cathedral in England, workers stumbled on this large sealed tin box. The interesting thing about this one, no one knew it was there, which obviously raises all sorts of questions. All we do know is that it's not set to be opened until 2086, but who exactly put it there. Why was it kept a secret? It's believed to have been placed there in the late 19th century, but there's almost no record of it anywhere. That means someone went to great lengths to bury this thing without telling anyone. As for what could be inside, some say it could be documents, possibly letters, maybe even some religious artifacts, but until it's opened in 2086, we won't know for sure. Although I have a sneaking suspicion it's already been opened. I mean, if it does exist after all. I mean, why the hell not, right? If that's the case though, why keep the contents secret? Well, if it contains something that challenges what we know about the history of the church or the people who ran it back then, that might be a reason why. Alright, now I'm cheating here a bit with this last one, but it's just so fun I had to talk about it. Consider it a bonus. The Nickelodeon time capsule. Yes, that Nickelodeon. There's not just some random guy from way back in history named Nickelodeon. At least not that I've heard of. So in 1992, Nickelodeon decided to put a time capsule together full of stuff that youngsters cared most about at the time. And all the stuff's buried in a big capsule in Nickelodeon Suites Resort in Orlando, set to be opened on April 30th of 2042. The list of items includes VHS copies of Home Alone and Back to the Future, Michael Jackson's Dangerous album, a Game Boy, a Ren and Stimpy t-shirt, comic books, Twinkies, Reebok pump sneakers, a Barbie doll, and news reports of the AIDS crisis, Desert Storm, and the end of the Soviet Union.
Greg Wilkinson's letter. In July 2017, a strange letter was found in a bathroom wall in a house in Sydney, Australia. It was written by a man called Greg Wilkinson, and it contained some disturbing predictions about the year 2060. That wasn't the only thing though. The letter also explained who Greg was, and that he wrote the letter on the 15th of April 1995. He enclosed a picture of he and his wife on their wedding day and explained how they met. He listed the cost of everyday items there, such as bread and milk. He said that the internet was the hot new thing and that it was currently exploding. Greg even included some information on current technology. He said he was writing the letter on Microsoft Word on a laptop with 8 megabytes of RAM. Greg described that as pretty high end at the time. It does seem quite strange looking back at that because the average smartphone these days is like hundreds of times more powerful than that. The letter begins to take a darker tone though as Greg talks about current generational trends. He said that AIDS is killing thousands of people and that it's decimating poorer countries. Deaths due to AIDS peaked in the mid-90s in the US but have been falling ever since. This morbid tone continues though when Greg moved on to the predictions for the future. Firstly, he states that his wife thinks the letter will be discovered in the year 2020, but Greg thinks it will be closer to 2060. The letter was found in 2017, and so it seems like his wife was almost spot on. Greg went on to say that he believes there will be an ideological problem with Islam that will plunge parts of the world into what he called a global war that could go on forever. Some people said this was a chilling prediction of jihadism in the decades since the letter was written. Others have said that's wrong and that it's an unfair characterization, and the prediction has sparked a lot of debate online. Greg also accurately predicted that China would become a world economic superpower. This may seem very obvious to us now, but at the time it was still up for debate as to whether China would be able to handle its own growth. At the end of the letter, Greg apologized to those of us reading in the future if his predictions seemed quite bleak. When the story went viral on Facebook, many users were impressed with his predictions and some even asked for the upcoming lottery numbers. Moving on now, we have Einstein's letter. In 1939, Albert Einstein contributed a letter that he wrote to the World's Fair time capsule. The time capsule is intended to be open in the year 6939, exactly 5,000 years after it was buried. The time capsule was called Time Capsule 1. In 1964, when the World's Fair returned to the same site in New York, a second time capsule called Time Capsule 2 was buried just 10 feet north of the first one. Along with Einstein's letter, Time Capsule 1 contained 35 small everyday items. These included a fountain pen and an alphabet block set. There were also 75 types of fabrics, metals, plastics and seeds. A small microfilm contained literature, art and news events of the early 20th century. These came to over 10 million words and 1,000 pictures. They even included instructions on how to make a large microfilm viewer and a motion picture projector to view the newsreels on there. There were copies of Life magazine, a Kewpie doll, $1 in change and even a pack of Camel cigarettes. The seeds in glass tubes were of wheat, corn, oats, tobacco, cotton, flax, rice, soybeans, alfalfa, sugar beets, carrots and barley.
Number 5. J.M. Barrie. J.M. Barrie was the name written on a trunk that was discovered in 2010 by two women who were clearing out an abandoned building in Los Angeles. J.M. Barrie was a nurse from Scotland, and she had the same initials as James M. Barrie, the author of Peter Pan, who's also Scottish. When the pair opened the trunk up, they were horrified to find two dead bodies of the young. They had been in there from the 1930s. They were wrapped in sheets and hidden in doctor's bags, along with some old newspapers and other belongings. Investigators found no connection between the two individuals though, even though a copy of Peter Pan was found and also membership papers for the Peter Pan Woodland Club Resort. The coroners reported no signs of trauma on the bodies, and one of them had clearly reached full term while the smaller one may have been born prematurely. Despite there being no concrete link between Peter Pan and the bodies, some people have speculated there is one, and that has something to do with Never Neverland, where the young never grow up, if you get what I'm saying. Number 4. Schoolboy. In 2016, a demolition crew in Albuquerque, New Mexico discovered a time capsule from 1968 near a former elementary school. It appeared to have been made by a boy at the time who wanted it to be found at some point in the future. Now, the workers were prepared for a cute message, but the letter they found was actually horrifying. The note read, "I am dead. I go to Montgomery School. That is the olden school name. I was born in 1900. Now I'm dead. My favorite subject is spooking the police. I play the guitar. In case you don't know what that is, it's a board with strings on them. I am 10 years old. See you later, savages." That was it. That was the whole letter, and it was signed by a boy called Greg Lee Youngman. Now, efforts to find Greg have been unsuccessful, and some people say that was because there was really some sort of guitar-playing ghost from a century ago living near the school who had just left a letter, and others say it was a kid who just wanted to freak people out. Either way, the letter itself is pretty creepy. Number 3. The Mother. This horrifying story from 2016 is about a woman in North Carolina who thought she had struck an absolute bargain when she bought a freezer from her neighbor for just $30. When she opened it at home though, she was horrified to find human remains in the freezer. Now, the neighbor put her own mother inside of there and simply told the buyer she had been using it as a time capsule. In an interview, the buyer said, "She sold me her frozen mother for $30. How do you do something like that?" I think an even better question would be why. The woman said she hadn't seen her neighbor's mother in months but didn't really suspect any foul play. When the police went to investigate on that day, they found the daughter had already left town, telling the buyer that she was going to West Virginia to visit her mother in a nursing home, even though she knew full well where her mother really was. Number 2. Box in the woods. A while ago, a man was using his metal detector in some woods and came across a time capsule. He excitedly opened it up but found some disturbing items inside. It was filled with a teddy bear, clothes, photos, a camera, and a girl's Pee Wee softball medal from 2003. It looked like the belongings of a young girl. Soon, people began to speculate if the time capsule actually held the trophies of someone who ended people's lives. If true, it's thought they wanted to hold on to these mementos, and they'd chosen the forest as a secluded spot where nobody could find it. I'm sure they didn't expect a man with the metal detector to find it. The police investigated but concluded that the items were probably innocent memorabilia left as a time capsule by their owner. They tested the items for DNA and began to reference it to the list of unsolved crimes, hoping to find a match that might lead to solving the disappearance from the past, but it seems like they haven't gotten an answer. And coming in at number 1 is Hiroshima. In January 1968, two Japanese companies agreed to create a joint time capsule project in celebration of Japan's World Exposition in 1970. It was intended to be buried for 5,000 years, but the upper capsule was opened in the year 2000 and is intended to be opened every 100 years afterward. It was intended to give the people of the future an insight into the world in 1970 and also the everyday life of Japanese people. It contained artifacts recorded through art, literature, and music, and it also contained some more unusual items like a slinky toy, some glass eyeballs, and the black fingernail of a Hiroshima atomic bomb survivor. Yeah, gross. It had only been 25 years since the US dropped that atomic bomb in Hiroshima that led to Japan's surrender, and it was still fresh in the mind of many Japanese people. Now, human fingernails do not decompose, so this one should still be intact in the year 6970. The time capsule's creators felt that this would serve as a reminder of the horrors of the war for all future generations, which I have to say is a good idea, but it sure is dark.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the mental hospital. In 2015, a construction crew in Indiana discovered a time capsule from 1958 that was put there by the staff of a former a mental hospital. It contained their message to the future, to us, and it was in the form of a video. The experts were excited to hear what the message would say, but were disappointed to find that most of the audio was missing. It had degraded over the years. There was only a little bit left at the end, where an unknown man said, "When the psychiatrists of the future open this time capsule, only they will be able to tell how well we've solved our treatment problems." The audio cuts out, and when it returns, the men are discussing electroshock therapy, a common practice in the 50s used to treat mental disorders, which has fallen out of favour and been heavily criticised over the years. Now, the hospital eventually closed down in 1992. Historians have a hard time figuring out who are the men in the actual video and what the missing audio parts were, especially when it comes to electroshock therapy. Next up at number 9 now, we have Abandon. This one comes from Imgur, where a user shared a strange box they found in their grandmother's house while helping her clear up. It was a safe, but the grandmother didn't know the combination. They took a hammer and a chisel to it, and when they finally opened it up, they quickly realised it was a time capsule. The grandmother believed it must have been put together by her own grandmother many years ago. That made it at least 4 generations old. Inside, they discovered a note that read, "Abandon all regret, ye who enter here." That's a famous line from Dante's Divine Comedy. Now, they figured it may be a sort of ominous warning, but they continued to look through the contents. They found a bag with Chinese calligraphy on, which read "Double Happiness." Inside, they found a pen, a plastic box, a suede pouch, and an oil lamp. They also found pictures of the grandmother's own grandparents. They were glad they didn't heed the creepy warning on the note. Moving on to number 8 now, we have J.M. Barrie. That's the name written on a trunk that was discovered in 2010 by 2 women who were clearing out an abandoned building in LA. J.M. Barrie was a nurse from Scotland, and she had the same initials as James M. Barrie, the author of Peter Pan, also Scottish. When they opened the trunk up, they were horrified to find the bodies of 2 babies in there from the 1930s. They were wrapped in sheets and hidden in 2 doctor's bags along with some old newspapers and other belongings. Investigators found no connection between the 2 individuals though, even though a copy of Peter Pan was found with the babies, and there was also membership papers for the Peter Pan Woodland Club Resort. Coroners reported no signs of trauma on the babies and could find no evidence that they had been aborted. One of them had clearly reached full term, while the smaller one may have been born prematurely. Despite there being no concrete link between Peter Pan and the babies, some people have speculated there is one, and that it has something to do with Never Neverland, where children never grow up. Is that a little bit morbid? Do you think there's something darker to this story than meets the eye? Moving on to number 7 now, we have The Boy. In 2016, a demolition crew in Albuquerque, New Mexico discovered a time capsule from 1968 near a former elementary school. It appeared to have been made by a boy at the time who wanted it to be found at some point in the future. The workers were prepared for a cute message, but the letter they found inside proved to be quite a bit creepier. It read, "I am dead. I go to Montgomery School. That is the olden school name. I was born in 1900. You auto, now I dead. My favourite subject is spooking the police. I play the guitar. In case you don't know what it is a board with strings on them. I am 10 years old. See you later, savages." That was it. That was the whole letter. It was signed by a boy called Greg Lee Youngman. Now, efforts to find Greg today have been mostly unsuccessful. Some people say that's because there really was some sort of guitar playing ghost from a century ago living near that school who had just left the letter. Others say it was just a kid with a large imagination. Either way, the letter itself is pretty creepy. Moving on now to number 6, we have Mother. This is a horrifying story from 2016. A woman in North Carolina thought she had struck an absolute bargain when she bought a freezer from her neighbor for just $30. When she opened it at home though, she was horrified to find human remains in the freezer. The neighbor had put her own mother inside there and simply told the buyer she had been using it as a time capsule. In an interview, the buyer said, "She sold me her frozen mother for $30. How do you do something like that?" I think an even better question would be why. She said she hadn't seen her neighbour's mother in months but didn't really suspect any foul play. When the police went to investigate on that day, they found the daughter had already left town, telling the buyer that she was going to West Virginia to visit her mother in a nursing home, even though she knew full well where her mother really was.
We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Martin Luther King Jr. time capsule. Located under the Freedom Plaza in Washington, D.C. is a time capsule buried in 1988. This time capsule contains the belongings of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You'll find a number of his personal possessions, such as his Bible, a robe he wore to preach in, and most importantly, the audio recordings of a number of his speeches. This capsule is said to be unearthed in 2088. Moving on to number 4, we have the Westinghouse time capsules. The Westinghouse time capsules are 2 time capsules created by the Westinghouse Electric Manufacturing Company. Both were buried at different times, but to be opened at the same time. The first was buried in 1939 and is said to be opened in 6939. This one contains microfilm, newsreels, seeds, and fabrics. The other time capsule was created in 1964 and is also meant to be opened in 6939. This one contains an electric watch, electric toothbrush, among hundreds of other items that were popular and in demand at that time. Coming in at number 3, we have Bunker Hill. Now, this time capsule is pretty odd. So it was buried in 1961 in Los Angeles and was said to be opened on May 9th of 2011. Yet, it has never been opened. Either people forgot about it, or they lost the capsule, or people just can't be bothered to dig it up. But it makes for a good scavenger hunt if you want to go out and find it yourself. I'm just kidding. This capsule is said to contain old telephone equipment, including transistors, solar batteries, and an operator's headset. And now I genuinely want to know what happened to this capsule. Did they just forget where it is or something? Like, I want to know. In our second spot, we have the Sleeping Beauty Castle capsule. In 1995, a time capsule was actually buried at Disneyland. It was buried in Sleeping Beauty's castle. So the next time you go there to take a picture in front of the castle, just think to yourself, wow, I'm standing right above a time capsule. Apparently, this capsule contains artifacts representing the first 40 years of Disneyland. But we still don't know exactly what items are in there. I just predict a lot of Mickey Mouse memorabilia. This time capsule is actually going to be opened very soon, and soon I mean 2035, which is close compared to some of the ones on today's list that won't be open for like thousands of years, okay? And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Crypt of Civilization. This is definitely one time capsule that you do not want opened. Why? Well, it was created in case of the downfall of society, and it's unlike any other capsule on this list. That's because it's not just a tiny box, but it's a full-on chamber. So it was built from 1937 to 1940. It's a 2,000 cubic foot room filled with documents and artifacts, like 640,000 pages of microfilmed books, religious texts, etc. It even contains a special language integrator to help teach English to whoever finds the vault. It also contains items such as 800 works of every subject, historical recordings, and items to show our technological advancements like typewriters. Now, the opening date of this capsule is not for another 600 years, or like I said, until our society fails. This vault is said to preserve our way of life in case of a mass extinction. There's also a bunch of random stuff in this vault that I had to let you guys know, like there's Lincoln Logs, throwback to those, pantyhose, because why not, and a figurine of Donald Duck. Yes, because those items are imperative for a society to flourish. Imperative.
Number 10, statues. Workers seem to have discovered what appears to be a 121-year-old time capsule in 2022 as they were dismantling the remnants of a pedestal that once held a statue of the Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Crews have been working to remove the pedestals of the Confederate statues for months. The apparent time capsule found is likely the third one recovered from the Confederate pith on Monument Avenue. In December, a time capsule was found inside the former base of the Robert E. Lee statue when crews dismantled it. There's also a report to be a time capsule beneath the Stonewall Jackson statue, which could be found soon too. According to newspaper records, the box is said to contain relics of the Civil War, Masonic tradition, and Richmond history, including a guide to Richmond and the battlefield by Carton McCarthy, a $100 Confederate note, the Daily Dispatch and Richmond Times newspapers, and a polished chip of marble from the front step of the Jefferson Davis Mansion, now known as the White House of the Confederacy. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this actually is pretty cool. Number 9. World War II. In 2016, a time capsule buried by the German army in 1934 was found in Poland. Archaeologists had known about the capsule's existence for a number of years, but it was buried under thick concrete. They had buried it there over 80 years before during the construction of the Oldenburg-Rossness building, which was used to train officers of their party. Professional miners broke through the concrete, and even then they had to wade through large amounts of groundwater that had pooled up. Now, once it was on the surface, the historians were eager to open it up. What they found was both surprising and not surprising. There were a number of photographs, including some images of their German leader. There are newspapers along with 2 copies of an autobiographical manifesto written by their leader. One of the researchers described the contents of the time capsule as perfectly preserved, as the place it was buried was an important place for those kinds of people. Number 8. Einstein's letter. In 1939, Albert Einstein contributed a letter he wrote to the World's Fair time capsule. The time capsule is intended to be opened in the year 6939, exactly 5,000 years after which it was buried. The time capsule was called Time Capsule 1, and in 1964, when the World's Fair returned to the same site in New York, a second time capsule called Time Capsule 2 was buried just 10 feet north of the first one. Now, along with Einstein's letter, the time capsule contained 35 small everyday items. In the years since then, the world has come to respect Einstein as one of the most intelligent people of all time, and someone who seemed to have a great insight into the unknown. That's why when people found his letter that described the brutality of war and its place in human nature as quite disturbing. His note read, "Our time is rich in inventive minds, the inventions of which could facilitate our lives considerably. We are crossing the seas by power and utilize power also in order to relieve humanity from tiring muscular work. We have learned to fly, and we are able to send messages and news without any difficulty over the entire world through electric waves. However, the production and distribution of commodities is entirely unorganized, so that everyone must live in fear of being eliminated from the economic cycle, in this way suffering for the want of everything. Furthermore, people living in different countries kill each other at an irregular time intervals, so that also for this reason, anyone who thinks about the future must live in fear and terror. This is due to the fact that intelligence and character of the masses are incomparably lower than the intelligence and characters of the few who produce something valuable for the community. I trust that prosperity will read these statements with a feeling of proud and justified superiority." Now, this is a great message, and I feel like it will always be relevant, but it wasn't supposed to be opened for a long time though, so I just want to know why they opened it so soon. Number 7. The apartment. In June 2010, a French woman named Solange Bourgin died in south of France at the age of 91. When the executors of her were going through her records, they discovered that she actually owned an entire apartment in Paris that she had never mentioned before. They noticed that she'd been making regular payments for this place for decades, and when they finally opened it up, they were astonished to find the apartment had been untouched. It contained countless paintings, furniture, and common elements of the early 20th century life. The whole apartment was a time capsule frozen in time. So why did she have that mysterious apartment? Well, it turns out that Solange had inherited the apartment after her grandmother died in 1939. Now, at some point during the Second World War, Solange had left her apartment in Paris and fled to the south of France from the Germans when they arrived. Now, she never mentioned the apartment to anyone, but continued to pay for it over all those years. While some of the priceless paintings just gathered dust, one of them even sold for €3 million at an auction. Number 6. Mental hospital. On July 23, 2015, a demolition crew working on the grounds of the former Central State Hospital unearthed a time capsule buried on July 23, 1958 in the cornerstone of the Barr Treatment Center building. Now you're telling me they accidentally found this exactly 57 years after it was buried? To the day? That is insane. Now personally, if I found something like that at a mental institution, I would leave it alone, but they opened it and it contained a message to the future, and it was in the form of a video with doctors who worked there. The experts were excited to hear what the message would say, but were disappointed to find that most of the audio was missing, as it had degraded over the years. There was only a little bit left at the end where an unknown man said, "When the psychiatrists of the future open this time capsule, only they will be able to tell how well we've solved our treatment problems." The audio cuts out, and when it returns, the men are discussing electroshock therapy. Now, the hospital eventually closed down in 1992, and historians are having a hard time figuring out who who the men are in the actual video, and what the missing audio parts were, especially when it comes to electroshock therapy.
Let's talk about Einstein's letter. In the years since all this, the world has come to respect Einstein as perhaps one of the most intelligent people to ever walk the earth, and someone who seemed to have a great insight into the unknown. That's why people found his letter that described the brutality of war and its place in human nature as quite disturbing. It read as follows: "Our time is rich in inventive minds, the inventions of which could facilitate our lives considerably. We are crossing the seas by power and utilizing power also in order to relieve humanity from all tiring muscular work. We have learned to fly, and we are able to send messages and news without any difficulty over the entire world through electric waves. However, the production and distribution of commodities is entirely unorganized, so that everybody must live in fear of being eliminated from the economic cycle, in this way suffering for the want of everything. Furthermore, people living in different countries kill each other at irregular time intervals, so that also for this reason anyone who thinks about the future must live in fear and terror. This is due to the fact that the intelligence and character of the masses are incomparably lower than the intelligence and character of the few who produce something valuable for the community. I trust that posterity will read these statements with a feeling of proud and justified superiority." Moving on now, we have Dante's time capsule. This story comes from a user on Imgur who said that one day his grandmother invited him over to her house to help her sort through some old stuff. Inside a safe in her ceramics room, he discovered a time capsule that even she didn't know was there. He found the safe while clearing out a cupboard and noticed that it had a false bottom to it. The fact that his grandma had no clue what was in there was exciting. It meant that its contents had been lost in time. They were about to discover something really big. Unfortunately though, his grandmother didn't know the combination to open the safe. After some deliberation, she gave him permission to open it by any means necessary. So they took it outside and they pried it open with a chisel. Inside the box, they quickly realized that the capsule had been put together by one of their own family members. It wasn't the grandmother's parents, but the grandmother's grandmother who had made the time capsule. That meant it was at least 4 generations old. Inside they found a message that read, "Abandon all regret, ye who enter here." Now this is a slight change from the famous line in Dante's The Divine Comedy, which reads, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." They weren't sure why their relative had swapped the words regret and hope. The poem that it's quoting describes a journey through hell, purgatory and heaven. They weren't put off by this slightly dark overtone though, and continued to search through the time capsule. They found a black silk bag with Chinese calligraphy on the outside. They translated it to find that it meant double happiness. They opened the bag, which contained an assortment of items including a pen, a plastic box, a suede pouch and even an oil lamp. Then they found pictures of his great-grandfather and his great-great-grandmother. Inside the suede pouch was a nice old pocket watch and a bunch of stamps from every corner of the world. The plastic box contained coins that were also from pretty much anywhere you can think of. Some of the countries don't even exist anymore. The final item that they discovered was a single solitary key. There was no note or clue as to what this key was for. It was a total mystery, but mystery was what this time capsule was all about. Perhaps one day someone will figure out what the strange warning on the paper meant and what exactly this key can unlock, but for now the answers are lost in time. So there we go guys, those were some scary time capsules for you in a little bit more detail than you're used to us doing on this channel. What did you think of that? Did you like there being less stories but more detail? Do you just miss the top 10 format? Hey, it's a new year, we're just trying out some new things, so let us know your opinion of course. I'm going to quickly jump over and read a comment out from our first time capsule video. Joe Schmo said, "The note wasn't a creepy warning, the Dante line is abandon all hope, while the note said abandon all regret. The note was saying the opener would not regret it." I think this is a great comment for the end of the video because as I'm sure you all know, I just talked about the Dante story in this video in a bit more detail. I think Joe might be onto something here. Maybe it's just a joke. Maybe they put that intense line in and swapped a word out just to make it seem a little bit more light-hearted. Perhaps they knew how creepy a time capsule can look after a few decades and they wanted whoever found it to not be alarmed.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Robert E. Lee statue. In September of 2021, a statue of Robert E. Lee was taken down in Virginia following the protests of the death of George Floyd. Upon taking down the statue, they found a 134-year-old time capsule buried underneath it. The capsule was uncovered inside of a square box, which was 20 feet up inside the granite block that the statue was mounted on. It's thought that the capsule was placed in the pedestal 2 years before the statue was erected. It is believed to contain items from the Civil War and even a rare picture of President Abraham Lincoln lying in his coffin. They just hope that the items have not been damaged by water. The opening of the capsule is said to be performed by a preservation team at a lab within a couple of days. Moving on to number 9, we have the Expo 70 time capsule. In 1970, 2 major manufacturers decided to create 2 time capsules that would remain unopened for 5,000 years. This was done for the 1970 Expo in Osaka, Japan. So each capsule contains 2,098 objects or recorded items. These items were culturally significant objects to the people of Japan, and most were actually recommended by the public to be put in there. You got everything from music to art to recorded messages and even literature in there. There's also apparently a slinky, ceremonial kimono, and the blackened fingernail of a survivor from the Hiroshima atomic bombing. Now, the time capsules have 2 sets of instructions. The lower capsule will remain buried for 5,000 years. The upper capsule was to be opened in 2000, which it was, and then every 100 years from that, it will be reopened to then be cleaned to ensure its survival. Coming in at number 8, we have the Nickelodeon time capsule. Not gonna lie, I am most excited for this one, just because Nickelodeon played a huge role in my childhood. So Nickelodeon buried a time capsule in 1992. They filled it with tons of 90s memorabilia, including a Game Boy, Home Alone on VHS, a box of Twinkies, and a jar of Gak. They then buried it in front of Nickelodeon Studios at Universal City, California. It is planned to be opened on April 30th, 2042, 50 years after it was buried. So set your calendar, folks. I'm excited. Moving on at number 7, we have George Lucas. Do we have any big Star Wars fans here? How about Indiana Jones? Why do I ask? Well, George Lucas created his very own time capsule and buried it at Skywalker Ranch. Apparently, the time capsule contains a number of priceless Star Wars memorabilia and artifacts. AKA, that time capsule is gonna be worth millions of dollars. But here's the thing, Lucas never wants the capsule to be unearthed. He said, and I quote, "It's for some archaeologists 2,000 years from now to discover. We have an archive and it is very big, but after a few hundred years it will be gone. So the only thing left is the time capsule." So thousands of years from now, archaeologists will unearth this treasure and be like, yo, how cool was Earth back then? They had lightsabers? That's sick. You know, they won't know what the heck this is. Moving on at number 6, we have the Los Angeles Bicentennial Time Capsule. In 1976, Los Angeles celebrated its bicentennial by burying a time capsule. And you're not going to believe what they put inside of it. They wanted the time capsule to reflect the era. So inside, they put a pet rock and a skateboard. How fitting is that? But they also put a dress worn by none other than Cher and a Lakers basketball jersey, among other memorabilia. All I care about is Cher's dress though. The capsule is set to open in 2076 for the city's tricentennial.
Coming in at number 5 now, we have Hiroshima. In January 1968, 2 Japanese companies agreed to create a joint time capsule project in celebration of Japan's World Exposition Fair in 1970. It was intended to be buried for 5,000 years. The upper capsule was opened in 2000 and is intended to be open every 100 years thereafter. It was intended to give the people of the future an insight into the world of 1970 and also the everyday life of Japanese people. It contained artifacts recorded through art, literature and music. It also contained some more unusual items, including a slinky toy, some glass eyeballs, and the black fingernail of a Hiroshima atomic bomb survivor. It had only been 25 years since the US dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima that led to Japan's surrender, and it was still fresh in the mind of many Japanese people. Human fingernails are made of keratin, which does not decompose, and so this one should still be intact in the year 6970, 5,000, well, almost 5,000 years from now. The time capsule's creators felt that this will serve as a grisly but important reminder of the horrors of war for all future generations. Next up at number 3 now, we have The Apartment. In June 2010, a French woman called Solange Beaugueron died in the south of France, aged 91. When the executors of her will were going through her records, they discovered that she actually owned an entire apartment in Paris that she had never even mentioned before. They noticed that she had been making regular payments for this place for decades. When they finally opened it up, they were astonished to find the apartment had been untouched for all this time. It contained countless paintings, furniture, and common elements of early 20th century life. The whole apartment was a time capsule frozen in time. It turns out that Solange had inherited the apartment after her grandmother died in 1939. At some point during the Second World War, Solange had left the apartment in Paris and fled to the south of France from the Nazis when they arrived. She never mentioned the apartment to anyone, but continued to pay for it over all those years, while the priceless paintings just gathered dust. One of them even sold for €3 million at auction. Moving on now to number 2, we have Einstein. In 1939, Albert Einstein wrote a letter to go with the contents of a time capsule that was being buried to commemorate the New York World's Fair. It remains 50 feet underground at Flushing Meadows and is not meant to be open again until the year 6939, 5,000 years after it was buried. Einstein's letter contains some creepily accurate predictions about the future. He talked about the great achievements that science had made in his time, but said that production and distribution of commodities is entirely unorganized, so that everybody must live in fear of being eliminated from the economic cycle, in this way suffering for the want of everything. Furthermore, people living in different countries kill each other at irregular time intervals, so that also for this reason, anyone who thinks about the future must live in fear and terror. This is due to the fact that the intelligence and character of the masses are incomparably lower than the intelligence and character of the few who produce something valuable for the community. When people hear about that message, they often feel like it resembles the world that we live in today. Are people living in constant fear of violence or economic threat? I'm sure the comment section in this video will have a lot to say about that. And finally, number 1 now, we have trophies. A while ago, a man was using his metal detector in some woods when he came across a time capsule. He excitedly opened it, but soon found some disturbing items inside. It was filled with a teddy bear, clothes, photos, a camera, and a girl's Pee-wee softball medal from 2003. It looked like the belongings of a young girl. Soon, people began to speculate that the time capsule actually held the trophies of a serial killer. If true, it's thought the killer wanted to hold on to these mementos of the people they've murdered. They'd chosen the forest as the secluded spot where nobody would find it. They didn't count on this man with his metal detector. The police investigated but concluded that the items were probably innocent memorabilia left as a time capsule by their owner. They tested the items for DNA and began to reference it to the list of unsolved crimes, hoping to find a match that might lead to solving a murder from the past.